This is a little technique I call high definition rendering. HDR toning is a tool within Photoshop. It started in CS5. CS4 has a version of it, but you need multiple images to create it. But HDR toning, you only need one image, and it's very, very powerful. I use it on almost all of my renderings for post-processing, and it adds a lot of depth, a lot of brilliance to the colors, and a lot of realism to your renderings. So I'm using Photoshop CS5, and I have an image here. For the sample file images, if you have the sample files, this is called Far West Before HDR. The reason there's a before and an after HDR is that when you're using HDR toning, it's going to flatten your Photoshop file. So it's important to save the file with the layers created as a before, and then do a file save as so you don't lose your layers. So I'm already going to say that I saved as. So if I go to Image, Adjustments, HDR Toning, it's going to ask you if you want to flatten your document, which you have to. So I say yes. Now you'll see right away, I'm going to pull this box over, it went to the other monitor. Right away you'll see that there's a lot more saturation in the scene. HDR Toning adds saturation right away. It's usually just sort of by default, so you don't necessarily need that. You could pull that down a little bit. You could crank the vibrance up if you want. That's usually a little bit better. What I usually do is I'll keep it local adaptation, and on the presets I'll leave it as custom. If you want, you can flip through these and see what they do. Some of them do some crazy things. You can see here monochromatic, high contrast. I mean, if you're looking for effects like this, it's pretty cool. But I usually like to go to custom. And I immediately start with cranking up the detail. So you'll see the details at plus 30. I'm going to go all the way up to plus 200. And you'll see right away, if I uncheck preview and recheck preview, you see right away all the depth that's added to your rendering. And the second thing I do is I crank up the radius. And that'll sort of smoothen out that detail that you just added. And now if I uncheck preview, I always uncheck preview and go back and forth. You can see all the range that this image has now that it didn't have before. And sometimes you can go through exposure and gamma. I usually don't really need to. Sometimes you can get some really, really hot spots if you do that. Shadow and highlights you don't necessarily need as much either. The one thing I do sometimes like to go to is the toning curve. Be careful, it will have a big effect on it, but I'll show you what it does. If you pull down here, you can see it starts out in the mid-tones and the highlights. And you can see it has some dramatic effects. So you got to be careful with what your settings are here. And I'll usually go back and forth, like I said, from preview to not preview. And what you can do here is if you crank up the strength of the edge glow, you can see what it does. I'll turn it all the way up to show you. So usually I like to keep that strength a little bit lower, but I keep the radius nice and high. Now if I click OK, we've got ourselves an HDR toned or a high definition rendering. If you like what you saw here, then head on over to bimafterdark.com and check out more videos just like this one.